Well, I think we are live. We are here with Lucy Steigerwald of various projects, including Reason. It has a variety for Reason, for Playboy, for antiwar.com.
Yes, that's true. Hi.
And I guess that also for the Federalist and the Daily Beast and a lot of places you can get her stuff that is very good. And I want to talk about anarchism because I think it was a funny story, because I think now someone who both know that is Michael Tracy's had started his podcast. I think because I interviewed him the other day, and I started this podcast because of you, of politics for people who hate politics, because it was the first podcast that I watched, and it was interesting. I hope one day it revived in some way.
Me too.
About these crazy things, and it's very curious because I think that I have talked with this with JC that the way that I came to anarchism was more or less for, despite it being on the left, I never was interested in anarcho-communists or anarcho-syndicalists. But when I discovered libertarianism via Carl Hess, I was interested in left libertarianism and that kind of stuff. But it was both you and Angela Keaton like smashing the say in the podcast that made me that made me think that anarchism was a good thing. So how you became an anarchist? That's more or less my question.
Well, grouping me with Angela is forever a compliment, and mentioning me in the same paragraph as Jesse Walker, also a huge compliment. And I'll kind of return the favor in that my parents are libertarians. I think secretly my mom is kind of an ANCAP, or at least close enough. My dad's more of kind of a Milton Friedman kind of guy on most days. And my beloved cousin is kind of a lefty anarchist, you know, the rabble-rousing, protesting kind. And so I thought about anarchism for many years, and the easiest way of describing it is that the first time I saw an Anthony Gregory speech, that was the tipping point. I saw Anthony Gregory, who was with the Independent Institute and has written for LouRockwell.com back when it was less terrible, at a student conference, and he had two speeches. One was rights and how they weren't good enough, ending individuals' sort of perspective, and his other one was about how war is the biggest violation of individual rights that there is, because it encompasses all of the other violations. Randolph Bourne knew that. That's why antiwar.com's foundation is named after him. There was a big old lead up to thinking about anarchism. What does that mean? Knowing some kids who called themselves anarchists in college who seemed awfully keen on state socialism as a compromise, which doesn't make sense. I don't know. Anthony was like was the nail in the coffin, and speech made me go, yeah, all right, I can't deny this anymore.
Yeah, I think that it was interesting. I think you once said that you, on a lot of issues, you agree with Sheldon Richman, which is more of a left libertarian, but you still call yourself an anarcho-capitalist. So that is kind of curious.
Well, yes, Sheldon Richman gets a huge amount of credit as well. He was kind of the precursor to the Anthony speeches. And I've read a little Rothbard and a few other people I'm supposed to, but mostly it was people who are around now who were influencing me. Sheldon Richman, I never got that he was supposed to be the left when I was 16 reading his articles. And I pestered him about this the last time I saw him in person, which was at Students for Liberty conference 2 years ago. And I said, no, really, are you the left? Like, what does that mean? And he tried to explain it to me the best he could. And it's almost the one thing I do disagree with him on is the use of that word, because I don't really get it. But it doesn't matter to me that much because he's Sheldon Richman. I mean, if you don't know his work, you should.
Yes, I have read it, and he's certainly one of the most interesting guys that is in the libertarian movement. But I wanted to do other day. I want to interview a guy in the Green Party, which is very interesting. It's like the Sheldon Richman of the Green Party, because he knows a lot of things of a lot of things. And actually, in the article about the foundation of the Green Party, it says that there were some free market libertarians there. And I am not necessarily that surprised, because I know that there are some Georgies that are interested in collaborate with the left. I think there are some in the C4SS. I don't know how much active they are. I know that some in the C4SS are now bashing Jill Stein, but back in the 80s, even Gis Walker, who knows a lot of this stuff, finds very confusing the history of the Green Party, because it was truly a decentralized organization, so there were a lot of Green Parties existing at the same time, and a lot of them have very different ideas, and maybe some of them even have some libertarian ideas. But what I wanted to ask you was, what do you think about the resurgence of left libertarianism? Because I think that on the one hand, when I started to listen about libertarians in the left, I started to listen about, for example, Will Wilkinson and Brink Lindsay and the libertarians, and they sounded to me like very reformist and
they're wishy-washy. They're kind of moderate.
But on the one hand,
a libertarian.
Yes. But on the other hand, I think that Will Wilkinson is actually very good on immigration policy, and he makes a really good case that I think will work well with the left. I think he makes a solid case for showing the benefits of immigration. On the other hand, I don't think that there is a real, how to say it in that way, that there is a real possibility of realignation of the Democratic Party in a libertarian way, because I think that actually Clinton and the Democratic establishment are neoliberals in their essence, and it's very different than libertarians. They can sign in sometimes a free market rhetoric in some sense, but it's different. On the other hand, the left libertarians, I in some ways maybe consider myself as one of them, have a very different task, because it's to work with the radical left that has some, on some issues is more easy to work. For example, while I know that Katie Reinsovitz has critiqued the Marxists for being against prostitution here in Peru, there was a sex worker who ran in, I mean, it wasn't a Marxist party, but was more or less a left-wing coalition that includes the Marxist party. So, yeah, I think that the radical left on some issues is somewhat more closer. And with Jace, I was also talking that Ralph Nader on some issues sounds very libertarian. And actually, in the interview that the Cato Institute made him, he sounded much more libertarian than even a lot of libertarians, because he said that he wanted to cut at least 50% of the government. So it's a lot. I mean, it's not, you don't going to find that from an average liberal. So what's your take on electoral politics? Because for a while, I even if I am somewhat on the left, I found some hope of the Ron Paul type of Republicans who win over the GOP, but no, it seems like very unlikely. How do you see things going on for libertarians then?
Well, I hate politics. I always say, hence the title of my podcast. And if I never bring that back, it's going to be because I love that title so much because it sums me up so beautifully. I almost feel now, years later, that I should have been more crazy for Ron Paul. He had a lot of problems, and he voted for bad things, and he was a politician and all that. But the thing about him is that he got better the longer he was in office, which is a very strange thing. He was the most libertarian when he was running for president in 2012. It was like a little libertarian victory lap after his years of being in Washington, D.C. And he was so anti-war, and he was just lecturing the whole world about being anti-war in front of this big audience. And that is never going to stop being amazing. Excuse me. And he's never going to stop being amazing for doing that. And he's always going to deserve credit, no matter what else you can say about him for that. And people like Justin Amash, even Rand Paul, who a lot of people, like Scott Horton, people I really like, just hate, I think are better than they could be, which sounds really, really sort of wishy-washy to say that. But, I mean, they're a net good. If someone's going to be sitting in Congress, they're doing a better job than most of the other people sitting in Congress. But as to there being some swarm of other Justin Amash's, or Ron Paul's, it doesn't look very good. There's a couple of people who are decent. Mike Lee is okay. The other congressman,
Thomas
similar.
Macy?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. He seems to sort of not even care even more than Amash. He was at the last Students for Liberty, and he was just like, I don't care. I hate the government. Just all. And all those people are great. I mean, the whole Donald Trump invasion thing is so weird. And whatever effect that's going to have on Republicans is so weird. And I could pretend to try to predict what will happen, but God, I don't know. And the worst thing about Donald Trump, besides, his cultivating xenophobia right and left, is that he's so awful that he ruins the schadenfreude I would have had over how miserable the neocons are. So I can't even enjoy the suffering of the neocons who are so panicked about Donald Trump because Donald Trump is also terrible. And that's disappointing, because if we can't enjoy William Crystal crying in the corner, then we have nothing. It's very sad.
Yes, that is truly sad. But I think that there is something very curious. I think that, and I have written about this, but there is also, you have a piece in the American Conservative, I think in the print edition, but in the online edition, there is several articles about what could happen after Trump, and there are two main currents. That one is the libertarians could take it over and try to appeal to the minorities and win a general election, which I think that is very optimistic, but I don't think how realizable this is. Or that the Republican Party is going to become an ethno-nationalist party in the sense of the European far-right parties. But on the other hand, I think this, while I know that some liberals would love to see that, I don't think that's so possible, because there are several things that will happen. Ron Paul is still in the GOP, and Justin Amash and Macy and other guys, even Jeff Flake, which is not that libertarian, but on some issues is more decent, and are like people that are definitely not ethno-nationalists in the sense that Trump and his supporters, or at least a part of his supporters, are. and that is for one part a very big concern, because libertarians for years uh, uh, in 2012, basically, the idea was, even Brian Doherty, which is an anarchist and very skeptic about politics, in his book, he's relatively optimistic about the possibility of the Ron Paul movement taking over the GOP. But
Yeah.
it didn't happen now, and it's very complicated. And I think that the thing could be learned about the Trump uprising is that, in the case if Ron Paul or Justin Amash or Thomas Macy or someone of a libertarian leading wins the Republican nomination, I mean, it will be worse. The establishment will try to find someone to run against, but I think that someone better, that the guy that Justin Raimondo parodies as Egg McMuffin, I think. If I don't know how McMuffin, the guy that is running as a third party neocon candidate, that I don't think
Oh,
is going to have many support.
yeah, the CIA guy, right? The former CIA agent. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
he's doing better than David French's aborted campaign, but that's not saying much.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. It's sort of an interesting story, but it's like he's in the background. He'll get a few votes, but I think Gary Johnson will certainly get more, and if you can't, and Jill Stein probably too. And if you can't beat those two, it doesn't really count as a success.
Yes, I think it will be a sadly failure for the neocons. But on the other hand, Hillary is basically a neocon. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I agree with some professors of international relations which argue that she's a liberal interventionist, that her goals are well, at good intentions, but I think that on the practical level she's now almost a neoconservative. I know that on Iran she is going to sound a little bit different. I have my personal theory about Iran, and it's not only myself, but I think not necessarily many people in the Pandit war have that theory. I think that the guy that have that theory writes in IndieWire, which is um, a site about films. It's that Iranian culture is has an importance to the West bigger than Saudi Arabia or Morocco or other countries in the Middle East, and that somehow an Iranian American community also has a prominent role. My idea in one of the articles was I think that there was a kind of opening of people have more ideas about Iran. And for example, Saudi Arabia, people doesn't have many ideas about Saudi Arabia. I think even recently was the first Saudi Arabia film, Waqda, I think was the name, that was relatively successful here in United States, and I think it came to some countries in Latin America also. But um, that is a curious path. I don't know how to say it, but how do you think that some libertarians, I think, are falling in the category that, well, Hillary is bad, but at least she's not Trump.
Oh, that. The least that I ask of every single libertarian is to not vote for the major party candidates. And you were granted a waiver if that candidate was Ron Paul. But in a year like this, in particular, when they're both so horrible, the idea that anyone would actually vote for either of them if they were libertarian is ridiculous. No one is forcing you to do it. Your vote will not make any difference. And yet all of these people, Donald Trump is very disturbing. There's lots to be really nervous about, and his fans, are even worse in some ways. And however much she is to blame for just sort of the more outright racism and xenophobia, and he's certainly partially to blame, that his followers seem to have picked up, well, it's disturbing. But what drives me crazy is seeing that and people acting like Donald Trump is already worse than Hillary Clinton. And I'm sorry, but that's not, he's never had the kind of power that she has. He's had a crony capitalist power. He's used eminent domain. He's had whatever power comes with being a very wealthy man. But Hillary Clinton already has blood on her hands. We know she's a total fraud when it comes to gay rights, when it comes to drug legalization. She's incredibly timid yet calculating. You know, when the water is just right for her to change her mind on something, she'll do it and pretend she was for it wholeheartedly the whole time. I mean, she was for gay marriage in 2013, you know, and the Libertarian Party was for it in like 1975, but God knows they'll never get any credit for it. And the war stuff alone should disqualify Hillary Clinton. Not just Libya, which was her baby invasion, but if you voted for the Iraq War, you should never be the president. Period.
But also a very interesting thing is that yes, always the story about the Libertarian Party being in favor of gay marriage, I think, since they were founded, but actually the Peace and Freedom Party, of where the Libertarians were also members, was also in favor. And I think
that's good.
that has
more the merrier.
That has a relationship with the radical left and the libertarians. That is story that was very interesting. I think you want a film played by Angela Keaton about that period. I think that Duchovny is doing something about that. Not necessarily about libertarians, but about the 60s in Aquarius, which is playing. I haven't seen.
I really want to see a film about Eric Garris and Justin Raimondo in California being ridiculous libertarian hippies and causing trouble in the 70s. I really want that film to exist. I'll probably have to be the one to make it, if anyone's going to. Yeah. But I think that would be a good one.
You can see Alongside Night.
I've never seen that. I've heard people were unimpressed by it.
Yes, I wasn't impressed, but it was an attempt to do something. I mean, the problem is that, and Todd knows that better than me. He was writing about the project of adapting the movie Sahara's Mistress has failed, but on the other hand, I was kind of happy because the project, the initial producer was supposed to be a more or less decent libertarian, so the film will be more or less libertarian, but then they changed it to a more or less average liberal producer, and then it fails. Well, I don't know. I don't know how if have some hope in libertarian films, but back to the topic of politics. I was wondering, what do you think is going to happen to crime reform? Because there is no how to say it, a time where even Ted Cruz sounded a little bit like a reformer, no? And Reason has pointed out that now when he started running for president, so he has started to sound more like an average Republican in that issue, and a lot of, and I fear that with Trump it would become always the law and order topic and less of the let's spend less. So what do you could say about that?
I'm already feeling a little pessimistic now. We've had so much good progress lately. I always think about a woman named Julie Stewart who founded Families Against Mandatory Minimums because of something that happened to her brother in the 90s. And I always think how for 25 years, she was just struggling on this issue of mandatory minimums, and almost nobody was paying attention. Nobody cared. A few libertarians did. And then in the last, 3 5 years, suddenly she's getting results. Suddenly people are caring about this issue. And it was really cool to see that, because I've been a libertarian long enough to wonder why the hell no one cared about the drug war. And liberals are going to have a very short memory on that one, I'm sure of it. The thing is, Hillary Clinton is a different kind of fraud than Donald Trump. They both have a core lack of principles and a horrible desire to do whatever they think they need to do. But Hillary Clinton is less likely to really... On this issue, I think a Hillary Clinton presidency might be less bad, because the pendulum has swung enough that it's politically safe for Democrats to be a little bit for reforming this stuff. It's in the air. Donald Trump, I mean, God knows he could switch up his rhetoric anytime and change his mind 5 minutes from now. But, you know, I was there on the RNC floor when he gave his speech at the convention, and it had that Nixon-like quality, that call for law and order that's very unsettling to watch. He's said repeatedly in speeches, police are the most mistreated people in the country, things like that. And it just, yeah, he worries me. As bad as Obama has been in many ways, you know, we're all going to be really sorry that he set the legal precedent about drone assassinations and having them in, you know, 6 countries the U.S. isn't even at war with. We're all going to be very sorry about that soon. And it's not as if Obama gets the credit for, you know, pardoning a few drug criminals and not sending federal troops to Colorado when they voted to legalize. But even worse president than Obama would have sent those troops and wouldn't have pardoned anybody. And he sees which way the wind is blowing. He sees which way the parade is marching. And he's at least letting it happen, not trying to completely stop it. And I have very low standards for presidents. So for him, that's a good thing. My old boss, Matt Welsh, wrote an article probably 3 years ago now that said, basically, I hate to say it, but considering how bad the prospects are for the next president, we might all look back fondly on Obama, even though he's done XYZ bad things. You know, the next guys or gals are likely to be worse. I'm starting to feel that way too. I think a lot of people might.
Yes,
as bad as Obama has been.
Yes,
in some ways.
I think. But what is curious, I think, is that I think that if you ask every political scientist in this country, it wouldn't have told that it will be this kind of presidency that we have seen the Black Lives Matter movement in a Democrats term and have erupting. And actually, party is have a lot of African American candidates in a lot of places where the Democratic Party has been a failure. But on the other hand, I have to make a point. National Review did a piece about the failure of Democrats to capture in mostly African Americans. But what it wasn't honest, that piece in Tell was why was the reason, because African Americans were afraid of the Republican Party. It was the implicit racism that a lot of candidates have shown in different races. I mean, if Cynthia McKinney was able to win easily despite his conspiracy theories and everything, is that in a lot of places Republicans had sounded very right-wing or far-right wingers, even some alt-righters sound moderate compared to some candidates that do outrageous things. I mean, some people think that it's Trump, but it's not Trump. There are people that were fairly to the right of Trump, like David Duke, for example, that is tried to waving on the Trump train, but was much. It's someone from another era, but it was someone from another era that found some kind of home in the GOP. But I was wondering, what do you think? Why do you think there is kind of silence about the in the libertarian movement about the Black Lives Matter movement?
I don't know how much silence there is. It kind of depends on where you're looking. I know people like our friend Jesse Walker basically have said in the past they support them. You know, I don't think he's, and it's this decentralized movement, and some of them are clearly very government can fix these problems. I don't know. I mean, Reason has talked about it. Certainly the left libertarians I've seen have been very, very in favor of it. A lot, I'd say if I was going to sum up the average libertarian response, and I mean the good libertarians, not the horrible people on Twitter who call themselves that but don't really mean it.
Yes,
I've seen them out there.
Yes,
I've seen them. You know, the kind of people who think that, well, I don't know. I'm reminded of when I wrote about Eric Garner for Vice, and some people would get offended if you mentioned the cigarette laws, you know, the law against selling the loose cigarettes, which was the excuse for the police to stop him in New York City and to give him that chokehold that led to his death. Some liberals are so ready for it to be 100% racial that they'll get mad if you mention that. And that's foolish, because if you look at the stop and frisk numbers in New York City, there's a serious, serious racial thing happening. It was like 20% white people, mostly Black and Hispanic men. And if you see it's a really easy way to profile somebody. You know, if you're a police officer, hey, that's a Black guy. I can see that, and so I can profile him based on that. But you'd usually still need a legal excuse. So if you see Eric Garner, the Black man, you could, you know, you find your excuse to stop him. This time it's selling loose cigarettes with, you know, usual stop and frisk. It would have been marijuana or looking for a gun. All these things based on Terry stops, which is a Supreme Court decision, Terry versus Ohio, which I think is kind of bullshit, of course. It's just that there's this fake war about Black Lives Matter. Not there are other things they're asking for and some of their, well, I would say, bad ideas, but this idea that it's, you know, it's either all about race or not about race when it comes to overcriminalization and police brutality. And people like Radley Bacco have it absolutely right, and God knows he would know, because he's been studying this. Most people have, except maybe, you know, Black people who've suffered from it. He knows there's race. Race is there. Race is a component. It is not everything. And I think I've seen, you know, the libertarians I really respect have said that, but they've also said, hey, there's something to Black people getting up and saying, you know, even Rand Paul has said this, saying we feel like something's wrong here. We feel like we're not being treated right, fairly. They're not correct about everything. All the things they're asking for, every identification of every problem, they're still decentralized, but they're right about that. I mean, there are all these people, just because liberals, you know, overuse the word racism, doesn't mean that racism, you know, stopped existing in 1865. Say, oh, why can't Black people get it together? You know, slavery was a long time ago. Yeah, but since slavery, we had Jim Crow, urban renewal, the war on drugs, police brutality. You know, we've had plenty of ways to keep Black people and other minorities down since slavery ended. So there's a nuance that even, you know, plenty of libertarians are also allergic to, but the best ones, they know what's happening.
But that's, I think, could lead us to the next topic, which was about the I mean, some of these people that are called the alt-right, I mean, they are usually anti-Black and anti-Hispanic, which is not that strange in the American right, but they have been somehow anti-Semitic, and that is something new in the American right, and I don't know how you see that, how to explain that.
I'm not the best person to ask. Again, someone like Jesse or some other people I know who really know the histories of all the weirdo fringe political movements and, waves and this and that. I'm not an expert on that. I don't know if being anti-Semitic is new in certain corners of the right. Unfortunately, if you're critical of Israel, and I'm critical of all countries, and that one is the U.S.'s special friend, you have some disturbing overlap with people who are shockingly anti-Semitic, people who believe the Holocaust didn't happen or was justified, whichever one you think is worse. I've had, as soon as I've mentioned the alt-right and mocked them, whatever they are, which is another question, on Twitter, I've had Nazi trolls come after me, accusing me of being Jewish, though I have a very German last name, which they can't seem to figure out. I had to block 50 or 100 people and they have these horrible, Twitter names that are jokes about ovens and references to Hitler and all this stuff. And they have this attitude of, I'll act exactly like a Nazi, have a username that makes me sound like a Nazi, and then I'll mock you when you think I'm a Nazi, because it's all part of the troll if I act exactly like a Nazi and then you think I'm a Nazi. I mean, there are real people under this. There's a real alt-right, I think, but my encounters have been, Twitter Nazi trolls, and you can either not take them seriously because it's just the internet, but there's someone out there writing this horrible shit, and I don't know.
Yes.
I don't have numbers in front of me that say there are this many more Nazi Twitter accounts than there were when, before Trump was president. I don't know, but it feels like something is increasing and that there is this backlash. What they think is a backlash to political correctness looks an awful lot like acting like a fucking Nazi. So that's a shame.
Well, but what I mean, continuing with Judaism, I think Judaism has a particular curious relationship with libertarianism as abroad, because on the one hand, I mean, if you think in Mises, in Rothbard, they are very prominent in libertarian circles. And on the other hand, curiously, paleo-libertarians were closer to them in theory. Some of them have quite anti-Semitic views of society in general, no? Especially, I mean, I understand that there is legitimate criticism of Israel, but some of them try to use basically the anti-interventionist position to try to bash Israel for everything, basically.
Well, yeah, and the anti-interventionist position in this case often looks a lot like isolationism, which is, the slur they used against Ron Paul, but is the kind of thing that applies more to people like Pat Buchanan and to Donald Trump and the kind of people who like Donald Trump. The type of people who want really strong borders, and they don't really like trade very much, and they want a lot of protectionism, and they also seem like they don't want to invade as many countries, and they also will critique, the U.S. being so close with Israel, giving it so much money and stuff. So there's a couple of good points in this very strange melting pot of beliefs that all come back to what is truly isolationism, not ism. And there's also a disturbing progression that I've seen, which is how libertarians turn into fascists. At best, a libertarian and a fascist are antithetical. They're totally different. But libertarianism has this distrust of democracy, right? Because just because 51% of the people voted doesn't make it moral or practical or sensible. And sometimes the distrust of democracy starts to kind of fester and rot and turn into, well, maybe a monarchy would be good. Maybe a dictatorship. Maybe some people, aren't up to freedom. Maybe freedom is just for white people, or white men. it's absurd, but I see how it happens, and it's happened to a lot of people who thought they were libertarians or claimed they used to be libertarians. And, you know, the first time I ever heard Hans Hermann Hoppe's idea about democracy being the most dangerous thing, now it was paraphrased to me by a kid on a street corner in New York City 3 in the morning, so I might have missed some of the finer points. Experiment, and the idea being, you know, a king or a dictator is less dangerous than democracy, because if you kill the king, the legitimacy of that state is gone. In democracy, there's this horrible idea that it's within all of us. You can't get rid of it. It's this poison. You know, we're the state, so the state can't be bad. No matter how the bad things the state does, it doesn't count, because we're all the state. And I see this in liberalism every day. My peers, the people I went to college with, they're absolutely infected with this idea, and it's very, very dangerous. People who thought they were libertarians or neo-Confederates, all these weird types of people who think they have this sympathy with libertarianism, have gone over to this freedom is for certain people, special people. And I see how it happened, but it's not very encouraging. It's something that has to be checked.
Well, I wanted to write some time ago an article about left-wing monarchism in some way. I don't know. There is, for example, an African king. I mean, he was a descendant of a Senegalese king and was brought as a slave, but the people then, the slaves then know that he was the king, so they treated better. It was a very curious story, but actually the Bolivian government did a ceremony and recognized the descendant of a king, and it's very curious. I had people in the alt-right probably will hate him, but anyway, it was very curious. But I was thinking in anarcho terms, I think that if sometimes there are people that want to create their own republic, but if they wanted to live alone, I don't see why it has to be a democracy. I mean, it doesn't have to have elections. I think that it's more practical if they want to live alone to declare their own monarchy in some way. I think, well, that's what I was thinking. But I think that we could go to the next topic that was science fiction. I know that you once talked with Jeffrey about this, about the relationship with science fiction and libertarianism. And I was very, I mean, I understand the deep and complex relationship with obviously in science fiction it is about creating new worlds or talking about the failure of other ones, and in both cases anarchism is seen as escape or as a new form of something, and I think it's very curious to realize that. I think that there is a lot of things political scientists do in America. They do papers on a lot of things, but it doesn't seem like there is a real serious scholar work on the relationship between libertarianism and science fiction. I think that there is someone, a guy, Paul Cantor, would teach English literature at the University of Virginia. But besides that, I think there is no other one that do a relatively scholarly work on that.
Seems like there should be about 8 scholarly works on this, because I kind of love when liberals get pissed off at the fact that basically libertarian sci is kind of, it's a really big, you know, sub genre of sci-fi, you know, and some of them just, I think they want to see the Star Trek world, and they get mad at the Firefly world. I was going to say earlier when you were talking about movies that my favorite libertarian movie was made by a liberal, because it's Serenity, the Firefly movie, and Like, I'm not, it sounds ridiculous, but have you seen it? Have you seen the movie?
No, no.
Ah, you gotta watch it. Well, there's a moment near the end where our Captain Mal, is talking about, they're good, to talk to this without spoiling you about it. They've discovered something terrible that the alliance, you know, the government has done, and they're gonna risk a lot to try to let people know, and that's all. That's all. But he's saying, if we don't do this, you know, in 10 years or in 20 years, they're gonna wipe the slate clean and they're gonna try it again. And there's this line about how they think they can make people better, and I don't hold to that. And every time I watch that, I'm just like, oh, because that is it. That is it. That is totally it for me, which is these people think that they can fix humans, that they can tinker with them, that every law will magically lead to whatever they want to happen. You outlaw drugs, there are no drugs. You outlaw prostitution, there's no prostitution. You restrict trade, well, no black markets. Everything will be just as we want if we just pass the law about it.
That seems interesting.
Yeah, you should watch it. And a big liberal made it, though. A co-writer on the TV show Firefly, who had some involvement in the film, is somewhat libertarian. So you had a true libertarian influencing it, but I don't know. I think in that case, the total liberal Joss Whedon has a soft spot for this character, Captain Mal, that he created. Even if he, you know, as the creator of him, doesn't agree with everything that he believes, he still managed to make this great character who is a libertarian. I mean, undeniably.
I have more or less, I mean, my favorite film is Slager. I don't know if you have seen that. It's from Linklater, which directed Boyhood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the first film of him is Slager. It came out in 91, but I think it was originally released in 90, but the version of 91 is the one that was on cinemas on DVD, but it was filmed in the 80s. It was an amateur cast, and it was a very funny story, supposedly, because and a scene, and I have watched it many times, but at a scene about anarchism, it was very interesting that in a scene about anarchism, the guy which is talking about anarchism is for a moment he's talking about libertarianism, but what I wasn't realized only in the 6th or 7th time that I watched it was that there was a track that said vote for Ron Paul, Libertarian 88. It was a very funny moment, and it was like, but the guy doesn't sound libertarian because he sounded more like an anarcho-communist or something, but and said that he wanted to do a Guy Fawkes with the Texas legislature. It is a very curious film. I think its politics are very complex because on the last scene, I don't want to spoil the movie, but I guess if with 25 years that film, people should have seen it. But in one scene of the film, it's very curious that there is a guy with a shotgun and said that it's time for a revolution or something like that, and now that the left more or less try to push for gun control, I mean it's quite curious. I think that Linklater broadly is somewhat on the left, and I think, but it's somewhat. I think that the Texas left and is quite curious. There was this Congressman, Henry B. Gonzalez, I'm not wrong, that was anti-Fed, despite being a liberal, which sounds kind of crazy, but I think it's a populism that is beyond left and right. I think what happened in Texas. I think that this also explains why Ron Paul is Ron Paul.
I've seen a couple of odds and ends, different type of people more on the left who have picked up the ending the Fed thing. vaguely Jill Stein types. Sometimes they do that
Yes.
as well. It's definitely a weird cross section picked up that that cause. You're right.
I, I, I mean, there, even if certain libertarians like the Hunger Games, for example, has a very rebel sentiments. I mean, it inspired a movement in Thailand to protest against the monarchy, I think.
Yeah.
What I have read, I think in recent someone write about it. I don't remember who, but someone write about it, and it's quite curious. I think that science fiction always the process of electing a new king, a new president, or anything, and there is this distrust in this new one, and which is going to be as bad as the other one.
Yeah.
And I think that goes even beyond libertarianism. I think that's even some more or less establishment liberal kind of science fiction writers sometimes have this. And maybe this could have to do with Heinlein. I think Heinlein was a socialist before he started to write the Among the Harsh Mistress. I don't know exactly the story, but at least at some point, Heinlein considers himself a part of the left, and then he goes in another direction. But these are kind of plots that are bigger than than the authors themselves. I think it's quite curious.
Yeah, Heinlein. I've only read a couple of Heinlein books, but his politics feel like they're all over the map. People think Starship Troopers is a big old fascist story, and I can see some of the arguments in favor of that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Heinlein is saying, and this is just the best world ever, and this is exactly what I want to happen. I haven't read that book in a couple of years, but people always they do always read fiction. They think, well, this must be what this person wants. And again, going back to Joss Whedon and Firefly and Serenity, you can be a liberal and you can write out this libertarian sort of new post-Confederate Old West space thing. Tell not what you want, the world to look like, but you can still write it. So yeah, I mean, Heinlein, I've seen flashes of left, right, libertarian, and even the couple of books of his I've read. My favorite Heinlein book is actually The Puppet Masters, which I can get no politics out of really at all, though. I don't know. It's just about brain slug aliens that take over people. And, it's good stuff.
Well, I think that Robert Anton Wilson is always other of the great writers of a truly libertarian writers, and I think Robert Anton Wilson politics are very close to G's in the sense that on the one hand he has this sense about America that G's have also the I don't know if call it the kind of Bill Kaufman style patriotism, the kind of strange patriotism, but on the other hand, he has very left-wing sympathies, and I think Robert Anton Wilson was a very interesting guy. I one of my favorite TV moments that I have found in I think in YouTube is that in the 90s he was in one of the shows of Bill Maher in Politically Incorrect, I think.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. They were talking about acid, LSD, and he said that the LSD has a bad reputation because now they are selling other things instead of LSD, but the back in the days there used to be a good LSD for saying some way, and it's kind of interesting. It's not the kind of stuff that you will hear in a political show every day, and he was a very interesting guy. Um, I have read only his encyclopedia about conspiracy theories, and he knows a lot about it. He's kind of the Jesus Walker before Jesus Walker. I mean, in an even more anarchist and crazy way, I think. And he also writes for Playboy, which is kind of curious. And which is kind of curious is that actually the article that made me more or less a libertarian was the Death of Politics of Carl Hess, which was originally published on Playboy, but I think it was in another website, but I printed it. It's kind of funny.
That is funny.
A guy a friend of Top C, he was saying, I don't remember him. I think it was Franklin Harris. It could be that it was saying that actually even Hugh Hefner was a libertarian for a while, but then he morphed into a more or less establishment liberal, I guess.
I don't feel comfortable opining on Hugh Hefner very much, but yeah, no, Playboy has always had great articles. There's this joke, about, oh, I read it for the articles, not the naked women, but that joke never made sense because there was always good articles. So it's not actually as funny as that because there were always good articles.
It's curious, but I don't know, since, but I think that we could move to the other topic that I wanted to discuss, that was Pennsylvania as a state. Do you born in Pittsburgh? Where do you were born? Or do you live in Pittsburgh?
I was actually born in Los Angeles, right near Hollywood, but I left when I was about this tall, so you can't really see that. I was not quite 2 when I left, so I don't even remember, but officially that's where I was born. I was in DC for a while, and I'm back in Pennsylvania. I've spent most of my time in Pennsylvania on the western half of the state, about 25 miles or so from Pittsburgh. So, yeah.
It's funny because I think that on the one hand, the big cultural reference, at least in Latin America, from Pennsylvania is Philadelphia, and the Prince of Rap has an episode about that, and there is also some reference about some actors that say that they are from Pennsylvania, and the late night host asks them if they are Amish or something. No?
Yeah,
that is curious.
There's a lot of Amish people in the middle of the state, between Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Amish in the middle. So
yeah, but it's politics. I think that some people say that the Pittsburgh and Philly are kind of LA and New York in its politics, that are mostly Democrat. And I don't know if you see that.
Well, Pittsburgh has been run by Democratic mayors for like 80 years, something like that. I don't know as much about Philadelphia. Actually, the mayor of Pittsburgh right now, Bill Peduto, is not bad, and he's a lot better than the last, every mayor that I can remember. He's an improvement, in part because he's critiqued the police a little bit. There's also a new police chief who doesn't seem as bad. Peduto let Uber and Lyft come in, and he's for food trucks. Pittsburgh, under previous mayors, was fairly restricted. You didn't have the lively city life, the people on the streets. There weren't enough food trucks and stands, except in this one neighborhood that they were always, obnoxious bureaucrats would always look at and think, oh, it's so messy here, we should clean this up. And it was like the most city part of the city. And Peduto is an improvement. He's not standing in the way of the innovation that Uber and Lyft and food trucks and things like that bring. So, he's still a Democrat. They're all Democrats, but he's an improvement. So there's that. Philly, I don't know as much about. I know nasty things about their police department over the years, but I don't know as much about their history, I suppose.
But what do you get about the primaries in the Senate race? Because there was a guy, Bernie Sanders supporter, which was a mayor of Bedok, I think.
Oh,
Braddock.
Braddock. I've actually met that guy. I met that guy many years ago when I was in college in an arts class. The first year it was like a required sort of general art class. And we went to Braddock and we met the mayor, the incredibly tall guy who looks very tough, Fetterman. And he bought every person in my class a drink at the dollar store. And we saw his house. That was kind of neat. And that's really all I remember. And then a few years later, Nick Gillespie was mean to him on Bill Maher. I saw Fetterman at the most recent Hillary Clinton rally, and he was very, very ready to shill for Hillary. I don't like Bernie Sanders that much, that's for sure. But Fetterman really fell into line. Got to vote for Hillary Clinton. Look, my daughter's here. Can you let my daughter grow up with Donald Trump as president? It was very political in all the worst ways. So, but I've met him. It's like everyone around here has met John Fetterman at least once. It's kind of odd.
Well, the guy in Florida, I think, is more decent. The guy that tried to primary Davy Wasserman Schultz, Tim Canova.
Yeah.
I think he said, well, it has been a corporatist Democrat, and he didn't said I endorse her.
I kind of loved how mean he was. It reminds me of when Justin Amash beat the guy who was trying to get his primary seat, and the guy had run a really nasty campaign, basically implying that Amash was like a fan of terrorists. And Amash, has Palestinian background and stuff, and he's not as pro-war as he's supposed to be as a Republican. So when he beat this guy, he was kind of like, sucks to be you. I love when they don't, oh, yes, well, good race. Yes. I like when they're more honest like that. So I liked Canova when he was like, oh, the corrupt Democrats won again. Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, he brings me hope. At least some hope that there are still some kind of decent Democrats.
I wouldn't go that far.
Hope, but... I don't know. I mean, there was a guy that actually worked for the Mises Institute, I think, that ran a primary in New York but lost. He tried to primary a congressman, so it was kind of hard because in New York the politics are more establishment, but it was very, very strange because you don't find every day a guy in the Mises Institute that is more paleo-libertarian, despite that I guess that Roderick Long is still part. I'm not exactly sure, but in general it's much more paleo-libertarian. It was very strange that he ran as a Democrat. Although I guess that in New York City, run as a Republican wouldn't make much sense because the Republican Party is actually very bad in New York City. What I talked with Giz in the first show that we have in this podcast was that actually Romney did even poorly than third-party candidates in New York, and I was thinking that a businessman, even in Manhattan, he did poorly. So, yeah, the GOP is bad in New York. So, I don't know. Do you think there is a candidate that is libertarian in this election cycle in any way in a new candidate that is running that is quite libertarian?
There was a girl that I'm friends with on Facebook and in a couple of groups with who was running for Congress, and she got lots of legit endorsements, including one from Justin Amash, and she lost because she's a libertarian. She I would have endorsed her, I think. Becca Bridleck, something like that. I can't remember how to say her last name.
Yeah.
But I don't know, honestly, offhand. There's always a couple out there. The one time I voted for Libertarian for Pennsylvania State's Attorney General. So there's always a couple of decent people who are not going to win, and we should probably vote for them. But of course, I rarely vote, so I can't talk. Offhand, I can't think of any new exciting candidates because I'm bad at paying attention to politics because I hate it. Which always surprises people. They always think that I'm some sort of politics buff, and I actually hate it so much. So much.
Yes, well, I think I have to start to write about Latin America because I guess that libertarians get wrong Latin America.
How so?
Some libertarians think that the parties of the right are actually free marketeers when there are more or less like the Republican Party, which has more or less a free market rhetoric, but there aren't much free market. There are some, I would say, some truly, but I mean, Latin America, since people are not necessarily Rothbardian anarchists, but mostly are Friedmanites or Hayekians. There are some which are kind of decent, but on the other hand, like they are always more in the whole package of human liberty. They are also pro-choice, and that conflicts with the parties on the right that generally still in Latin America are pro-life, and so yeah, there are a lot of problems, and I think that the show should write of them. And I was thinking in write about Latin America in a while. I think there are different things that should be covered from a libertarian perspective. In some way, I think that there's a lot of things happening. And I think that there is an opening for libertarians. But on the other hand, I agree with Justin Raimondo, which made the case of... it's curious that Justin Raimondo sometimes makes the same case of left libertarians. That in Brazil, actually, the protests against Dilma have bring a guy which is even more corrupt than the Dilma, because Dilma wasn't accused herself of being corrupt, but her party. But the problem with Temer is that he himself is being accused of being corrupt.
Yeah, I don't know the details of Brazilian politics, but I've heard people raised that point before, and maybe some of them just think that anytime you manage to get the president impeached, it's a good thing. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, in Chile, there is a curious movement. I met once a guy from the movement that is called the Libertarian Left, but they are not left libertarians like Cory Massimo or people like that, but there are more... There were formerly anarchists that became a political party, and they are curious. The politics are very interesting, and they call for a decentralization. And I think in some ways there are slightly more free market than other parties of the left, that are social democrats, even if they don't say that there are free marketeers. But they are curious. There are some curious things happening in Latin America, and of course, El Alto is a very curious example of what is unfettered free markets in some way, because everything you go buy in El Alto, which is a city in Bolivia, which is basically an open market. You can buy guns, you can buy cars, you can buy pirate DVDs, you can buy toys, you can buy everything, basically. It's a city that basically come out of the literally spontaneous order. And it's very curious because it's a big question about what, and I think that on this one I will say that we couldn't say that this is free markets that have, or that this is capitalism that has brought up a development like the El Alto, because actually a lot of these people were indigenous immigrants that have basically nothing, and started doing commerce with the few things they have, and they have made a prosperous city. And as Gis have pointed out, their politics are not necessarily conservative. There were protests against a right-wing government, and that protest led to the ousting of the right-wing government, and then the victory of Evo Morales, and the country is fairly to the left of what it was before. But that city is a very vibrant economic place in Latin America.
Well, that does happen. Even no matter what your politics are, markets arise. I really do think that. You know, I think everybody should be allowed to go make a commune, and you know, good luck to you. But markets just happen. They really do. I really do believe that. Latin America, I think libertarians ought to be careful because they have a history of saying, "Oh, hi, Pinochet, what's up? How's it going?" And that,
Yes,
I mean, morally, obviously, that's very, very questionable, and it's also much more coldly practically. That really sullies your reputation as a political movement if you're hanging out with Pinochet. Now, other political movements can get away with literal murder and nothing happens to them. Libertarians have got to try a little harder because everything we do, we get critiqued for. But Latin America, there's some, you know, the whole history of America and other places just helping, they're banana republics in the literal sense, helping themselves to land, pushing people off of it and stuff. Even I can see, who doesn't know enough about, you know, all of those different countries, why there would be this free markets. Oh my God, you want that? You want, you know, the companies to come back and own the land and just be, you know, there's this aversion to it, but God knows I don't think nationalizing all the industry or, you know, being Venezuela helps. That makes things much worse.
yes.
But I've met, the first conference I went to was a FEE one, Foundation for Economic Education, and it was great how international it was, and there were a bunch of South American libertarians there, and I was very happy to learn that they were out there doing things. So I know you're out there.
Well, with that note, I think we should end up this interview. I mean, thanks for being here, and I hope other day you also could be here. Well, that is.
Thank you. Maybe feel better. I was having a bad day. I feel better now. I'll see you on the internet soon.
Yes.
Thanks for having me. Bye.